All right, I think we're all set. I think we're started up here. I should be. Okay. Alrighty. Then I'll probably, wait a little bit for people to start hopping in. Anyways, Lumpy, how are you doing? How are you doing today? You doing okay or chilling? Okay, now we got a couple of people. We got a few people in here now. All right, all right. Waiting for the goobers to arrive. Waiting for the goobers to arrive. We'll probably. When did we get started about last week, Lumpy? It was around 7:05, about 5 minutes in. Give or take, give or take. Okay. Anyways, I mean, how are you guys doing? How's everybody going on? We excited? Are we joyous for this week's class? All right. So, I mean, we still have time. I'll roll it back at around 7:05, but of the people who are here, um let's just kind of go through it a little bit. So we're going to be doing Introduction to Marxism. It's going to be Kollectiv University, obviously. Here we are. Marxism 101. We're going to be doing week 2, which is going to be Historical Materialism in class. So hold on. There we go. All right, we fixed it. So the agenda for today is going to be number 1, we're going to be doing an introduction to obviously Marxism and historical materialism. Next, we're going to be doing key concepts of production and social structure. 3, understanding class in Marxism. 4, classes and the means of production. 5, class conflict and capitalism. And 6, global expansion and historical materialism. Next week, maybe we'll do the text a little bit bigger. I'm going to move my goofy face out of the way. Hi, Nico. How are you? Or, oh my God, Coco. Jeez, my bad. Um, yeah, there we go. Now my face is out of the way. You guys can see it better. Last week, here's your big giant wall of text. Marxism as a method study, theory of history, critique of capitalism, etc., etc. You can take a minute to kind of, quickly look over this. But we're gonna be talking about, class primarily this week. So I'll give it a couple of minutes for you guys to look at it. A couple of minutes, as in like less than 20 seconds, because I'm impatient. Here's the QR code if you want to go and open up everything, get access to the class. Oh my goodness. My throat is all messed up today. I'm actually going to turn off my camera for a second so I can get some water. Jeez. Okay. Sorry. So here's the QR code. Hopefully my face isn't the way. I don't think it is in the way. Um, yeah, that's true. That's true. You're gonna have to feed the questions to me though, Lumpy. Sorry. Actually, you know what? I'll be good. I'll be good. I'll look at it on YouTube too. I'll have that open also, just super quiet. Oh yeah, we got a couple more people on there too. But I'm gonna be primarily looking at the Twitch. That being said, so obviously this is the QR code. Look at the QR code. You're gonna come and you're gonna be able to see where we're live on Twitch or where we're live on YouTube, whichever one you're on. If you want to look at the other, you're gonna be able to see our class, and then from there, currently our class on the link tree is really goofy. It's not working right now. So what we opted to do is to just swap it to Google Classroom. It's not what we want to do permanently, but it's just the easiest to do for the short term. Um, bring up my audio. Okay, hold on. Yeah, I don't think I can make it much louder. Maybe I'll just move it. I'll move it closer to my face. I think it's just I'm quiet right now. I'm quiet today. Is it a little bit better? Okay. So obviously, as far as assignments go, we're on the Google Classroom now. All the quizzes are going to be due on Tuesdays at midnight. It's the day before the next week or the next lecture. We're going to be doing a midterm. It's going to be about 500. Get out of my face, fly. It's going to be about 500 to 1,000 words. Let me do the thing where I move my face out of the way, if it is. And then all the discussions are going to be due an hour before Wednesday's class. An hour before, not exactly. It's a little bit more like literally the minute that the class starts. So it's due at 7 EST, which is coincidentally the same time that this class starts. And those discussion questions are more geared around the content of this week, and the quizzes are also on the content of this week, but it comes out after the lecture. Alrighty. So is everybody here? We'll say that everybody who is going to be here is here for right now. We can roll it back if we need to. Yeah. If you guys can hear me on YouTube, is it any better now or no? Is the audio better? Is it any better? Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. So section 1, we're going to be doing historical materialism. My face is presumably directly in the way. Let me move myself down here. So historical materialism. Obviously we're going to be kind of just expanding off of last week. Primarily again, the good parts of this is talking about class. So historical materialism. It Let me move my face out of the way. My face is just all up in the way. I would clarify, this is a histomap. This is a histomap down here, so it actually is tracking kind of like phases of society and whatnot. We wanted to make one for like historical materialism at some point. So starting from material life, um, you know, uh, my goodness, I'm having a stroke today. I'm sorry, guys. Um, Yep. So it begins with how people produce necessities, not with abstract ideas. Um, Work and production. The text is so tiny for my little eyes today. Work and production are set the basic conditions for social life. So most of society, most of intellectual life and whatnot is obviously, dependent on the material conditions that are backing it. I would qualify that you have your base obviously and your superstructure that comes from the base. The base is your economic conditions, the superstructure is what's built on top of it. Obviously sometimes the base like changes, so you move from a feudal mode of production to a capitalist mode of production, and the superstructure is still there, so you can still kind of have like, you know where a lot of people talk about, where Marx is talking about, oh, there's still bourgeois right in the lower phase of communism. That's kind of where you'll see it. Is there's still kind of like the cultural vestiges and whatnot of the old society that is maintained in the new society, despite the base that created that superstructure no longer existing. Um. So. Yep. Okay. So. Yeah. Next week I'm gonna do less lines here, less reading for my eyes. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I mean, it really is just like if we're looking at Mongolia or something, for example, right? Like the people of Switzerland and the people of Mongolia are not different species, like they're just humans, right? But the people of Mongolia, for example, they're going to have, it's okay, freedom. Um the people of Mongolia, for example, like you can see that historically they liked using horses because they had horses. They were on a terrain that was allowed for horses. You know what I mean? The issue with Switzerland is that it's a pretty mountainous area. You're not really going to have, a mounted horse horde of people, roving across the mountains. That's just not how horses work. That's just, you know what I mean? I do need a magnifying glass. This is horrible. So, you know, even though people are the same, you know what I mean, for the most part, it's just the conditions that they find themselves in, the create economic conditions, the resources around them create economic conditions. The economic conditions create what is and is not possible. And around those economic conditions are developed, culture and society and whatnot, right? So go to the next one. So socialism as a starting point, socialism describes how society is organized. It's not, it's not something that you can observe specifically. um, Focuses on material relationships between people in social life. So this is more Marxism than like socialism. Socialism as a ideology as opposed to, material conditions. But let me move my face out of the way of SpongeBob saying he's going to dismantle the Krusty Krab board by board. Board by board. Here we go. Here we go. All right. So earlier socialist approaches, the utopians, they're mostly focused on, religion and idealism, mostly focused on how things should be, not how things can be. You know what I mean? So they're mostly focused on trying to have what they think society should be like and just make it like that, convince everybody that it should be that way. Marxism, however, obviously, this is kind of reviewed just for last week, super quick, is mostly just talking about the fact that societies develop as a result of the material conditions around them, and as a result there's only certain things that can be done. You know what I mean? You obviously can't have a Genghis Khan in Switzerland, for example. You know what I mean? To bring back the Mongolia Switzerland comparison. So Marxism is asking why societies develop the way that they do, and it's treated, socialism as an economic system. If we're referring to it as a lower stage of communism, as Lenin does, it's a historical stage coming from capitalism. So, in other words, if I'm going to, just do my face here, you have within every system, right? Every system. You guys can see it, okay. In every system, there are contradictions. You know what I mean? There are contradictions, pressing up against each other. And each one of these contradictions, something comes out of it, and it's not that, they get rid of each other per se, right? is that they influence each other in a way that creates something new that arises from this system, right? Now, in each one of these contradictions, you have in society, historical materialism, you can find that, for example, most of the time you have feudalism. Hopefully, I'm spelling it right. I can't remember if I do. Oh my God. Feudalism, right? Into capitalism. And then that goes into socialism. And then that is supposed to go into communism. I'm not going to write the whole thing out, but it's supposed to go into communism. So each one of these kind of scenarios, each one of these systems, right? Each one of them, feudalism has classes within it because each mode of production creates a social order around it or underneath it uh, that is oriented around the mode of production of feudalism or of capitalism, of socialism, communism, etc. Communism, obviously, socialism, obviously, are a little bit more complicated when we're talking about class because there's not supposed to be a class. But that being said, there's still contradictions within, lower phase socialism, for example, because if there were no contradictions, then it wouldn't necessarily transition into communism or higher phase communism afterwards. Alrighty. Um, so from ideals to history, we kind of just went over this a little bit. Um, so early socialist thinkers, they talk mostly about justice, ethics, what society should be like. But Marx and Engels, however, they are asking what produces the inequality in the first place. So in this scenario, we're going to cut back to my beautiful face. We have, feudalism, right? We have feudalism, and here you have the lords versus the peasants slash serfs, right? So these two are both conflicting with each other because the lords own the land for the most part, and the peasants and serfs work on that land. They're exploited by the lords simply by the fact that the lord owns the land, not because the lord is actually providing much of anything, at least initially, when we're transitioning from slave society, slave economy into feudalism. The feudal lords are providing a protection to the serfs. At a certain point, obviously, they're not really providing much protection outside of the fact that there are nobles and knights and whatnot that will fight the wars on behalf of the peasants. However, as technology develops, as production increases, then things change. And as a result, the class society that surrounds it also has to change. Let me get rid of my face. Look at these goobers up here. Look at these German idealists. Cringe. Look at these chads down here. So, the method is historical materialism. It is the analysis of history as a series of class conflicts arising from the mode of production that was produced by the result of the previous series of class conflicts. This is more SpongeBob. Wonderful, wonderful. So material roots of history started from material survival. Any society must organize work to secure food, shelter, and basics. I will say we might not go all the way to 9, depending, but I may really yap about, Max Weber for a really long time, so time will tell. And after this section, after this slide, I'll stop for questions. Any society must organize work to secure food, shelter, and basics. And this everyday production is the foundation for social life. So for the average peasant, you need to produce food. For the average uh, landlord or lord, they need food, to feed themselves. So what happens is society is organized around the landlord providing protection to the serf, and in return, the serf provides food. And today, the scenario is a little bit different, obviously, because we have the capitalist and the proletariat. But we'll go into that a little bit more, because these slides don't necessarily talk about the lord and um, the peasant as much. So I'm obviously adding it in. So production shapes society, how people produce influences institutions, politics, and social relationships. That is what we would call the superstructure. So, for example, this is where our dialectical materialism starts happening, and we have the base, right? The base, which is the current production, influences the superstructure. The superstructure influences the base, right? So the superstructure influences the base. The base changes and influences the superstructure. The superstructure changes, re-influences the base, and so on and so forth until, whenever. I don't know. Not necessarily the end of history per se, but until, we stop existing, I suppose. And I mean, everything is in a constant state of change. The superstructure is always changing, and the base is always, adapting as a result of that. Let me go back to the slides. So, why does history change? Production shapes society. Ideals and culture develop within these material conditions, and why history changes is as production develops, old arrangements can stop fitting with new fitting new realities. Sorry, and the change follows when social relations adapt to new productive capacities. So the superstructure obviously is influencing the base, right? But so does technology, right? Technology influences the economic mode of production because it fundamentally, in many instances, can change how production happens, how efficiently production can occur. So, for example, in feudal society, again, I'm talking about feudal society, but I'll do capitalist society. I'll go off the top of my head. So, for example, we have a artisan. He's a small business owner, right? He's producing just enough to keep going. So he's a small business owner, but he doesn't employ anybody, right? Produces just enough to keep going by. But there's this new technology that comes out. He used some of his money that he makes to get this new machine. This new machine can increase his labor, the value of his labor by a lot. So what he does is he uses the profits he gets from that machine to, for example, buy another machine. He can't work two machines at once. So what does he do? He starts paying another guy to start working on that machine too. And then at a certain point, the new uh, technology, the new like automation, the new whatever, the new machinery creates conditions for the increase in production, and therefore creates conditions for new class relations. So that being said, I will stop for questions here. I'll stop for questions right in between here. So go back to section 1 and I'll just wait. Do we have any questions about this so far for this section? Ask me questions. Ask me them. Sorry. Sorry, Lumpy. All right, Lumpy. Um, I'll tell you what. I'll ask one of you guys a question. So this is in line with one of the questions we were asked for our discussion post. Um, what would you define as class? How do you guys define class? And if you don't want to answer that question, how does like how are class and historical materialism intertwined? What's the connection? I'll call on one of you goobers. I'll find you. I'll find you and I'll tell you to answer this question. Answer it. Answer it, Lumpy. Okay, sorry. So can you provide another example of historical materialism? Okay, so I would clarify that it's not really like historical materialism isn't like a specific example. It's not like I'll put it like this. It's not a specific example. It is more a overarching like theory of history, right? So hopefully you can see my board. I'd feel bad if you couldn't. But Hisma, I'm writing it super badly, so my handwriting is be terrible. I'm sorry. But as a whole, you have historical materialism as like a theory of history, right? So within every system, right? Every system, there are classes that are in conflict with each other. So class A versus class B, right? So class A and class B are in conflict with one another. They both have a struggle and one of them wins out or neither of them win out, right? And the result is a new system, right? So in each system and throughout all of human history is a conflict of, these classes. So in slave society, you have obviously the slave and the slave owner. There is a natural contradiction between the two. It cannot happen forever. At some point, you know, something is going to happen where that doesn't happen anymore. One of the instances is in, Rome, they transitioned from that, later on into a feudal arrangement, right? So instead of these peasants being slaves, they became peasants, right? Obviously, this is different in, like the colonial period, but then you have in that you have the peasant and the lord. Out of that, eventually the aristocracy, the monarchs, etc., they all kind of fall to various revolutions. They fall to peasant revolutions. And from the peasantry, now that they own their own land, they own the means of production, they begin using the food or items or whatever that they produce to sell with each other, right? The peasants who are successful, they end up uh, they end up increasing their production. They end up hiring the unsuccessful peasants. The unsuccessful peasants stop being a peasant and they start becoming a wage laborer. And the artisan or peasant who is successful stops being a peasant and becomes a capitalist. So it isn't so far as there is once that historical materialism is like a example of a specific thing so much as it is an explanation of the process of history and of classes. So I mean, I hope that sort of answers your question. And you'll have to let me know if it obviously does answer the question. So they said class is the separation of people based on their relation to the means of production. Yeah, I agree. Coco said classes is a social relation to the mode of production. Is that right? Yeah, for the most part, yeah. Um, social relation, I feel like oftentimes in Marxism is a little bit like less. It doesn't sound right, but it is right. So it's your social relationship to the mode of production, but your social relation to the mode of production is just like the other person said, is your relationship to the means of production. So do you own it? Do you not own it? In what way do you not own the means of production, et cetera, et cetera? But let's go back to the slides. We'll go to section 2. Key concepts of production and social structure. So mode of production. A mode of production is a society setup. So mode of production is the overall way that that production is organized. Let me presumably move my face out of the way. Yep, my face was in the way. I was right. Look on YouTube again. Sorry. So HISMAT is essentially a process used to analyze and understand conflicts in class and systems. Yeah, it's a theory of human history, so to say, for lack of better terms, or I guess for brevity. So back to this. So mode of production is a society's production setup. It's the way that society organizes production. And by society, it's, I'm saying society as in like just the general makeup of society, or the leaders of society. So that could be the capitalists that are doing that, or landlords, or whatever. So it answers how necessities are made, and by necessities, it's how necessary items are made and how it's coordinated socially. So, for example, this would mean like, and hi everybody else who has joined us. Obviously, if you guys have questions too, that's fine. I'll kind of answer them as I see them. What was I saying? Yeah, so I mean, society needs to. Every person needs to get their base necessities filled. They need to be able to live. You know what I mean? They need to be able to eat. So how a society figures out how everybody or most people get to eat is uh, expressed in its mode of production. The mode of production is the method in which society produces its own, re-existence, its own, continuation. Not even how it produces its own products. So two parts that fit together is productive forces are the tools, technology, and resources used. And productive forces would also include you as a person, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong. So that would be you. You're also a part of the productive forces to a certain extent. And relations of production are the rules of ownership, control, and work. So your relationship to production is how do you rule, control production, at least in overall. Do you have any say in how the mode of production of society works? Does your class have any say in how the mode of production is working? Do you as an individual have any say over your workplace? You know what I mean? Do similar members of your class, so on and so forth. So why this matters. So it lets us compare different historical systems by their production structure, and it shows how changes in production can shape society over time. Do we have any questions on that slide specifically? I know this is a lot. I mean, which of you guys would be able to kind of, I mean, would one of you guys, I guess, be able to sort of describe mode of production? Like, what would you say the mode of production is today? What is the current mode of production? Is the means of production a way to say productive forces? Sort of, yeah. Um, so the thing is that, and that's a really good question. So Coco said capitalist, absolutely right. Somebody said, Jay Bird said, is the means of production another way to say productive forces? So, no, no, but you're not like super far off, right? So, I'm erasing the board back here, but we'll see if I decide to write on it or not. So, to make my face super big, the means of production, right? So the MOP is like your tools, right? It's what you use to produce, right? Productive forces is kind of like the influence, I guess, on the means of production, so to say, right? So like if you own the means of production, you're owning like the factory and all the tools, right? But the productive forces is almost like the, I guess, the force behind production itself. You know what I mean? It's kind of like the underlying um trend almost. So like if you're trying to develop the productive forces, for example, you are trying to develop the means of production, I guess, further along, right? Sorry, let me readjust here. But I mean, in a roundabout way, like yes, but not quite. Like productive forces would include like technology overall, which doesn't necessarily have to be a specific means of production, right? So like the means of production in your workplace does not have to be like the totality of the productive forces. No, I mean, so the means of production is like, I suppose, more like specific items of production. Um, Productive forces is more maybe the totality, I suppose, is the best way I can try to explain it. So industrialization would be the productive forces. Yeah, yeah. Capitalism is your, yeah. Industrialization is the productive forces. Um, Capitalism is the mode of production, and your class is your relationship to the mode of production. You know what I mean? But I mean, if anybody has a better way of trying to explain that, I think that's a really good question. If anybody has a better way of explaining that, you know, feel free. Feel free. So productive forces includes land, tools, machinery, infrastructure, and technology. They are the practice. There we go. So here we go. We're getting to the answers. Sometimes I forget where I put these slides, guys. I'm sorry. Um, they are the practical capacity a society has to produce wealth. What they determine is they shape how society. Let me move my face out of the way. Is my face in the way? What am I talking about? My face is in a fine spot. They so they shape how much society can produce and at what speed. They also shape efficiency, which would be how much output comes from a given effort, and why development matters. A product As productive forces grow, existing arrangements are put under pressure, and over time, this pushes social life to reorganize around new capacities. So, again, um, in the instance of like, uh, I guess, industrialization, like the person was saying, industrialization, it's productive forces. You have that farmer who gets a, I don't know, a really dope tractor. He's just so baller in his amazing tractor. So he has this tractor, and he can't run more than one tractor at a time, but he doesn't have one, so it's not a big deal. But he uses the tractor to get a shitload of food, just like a metric fuck ton of wheat, right? Now he has a higher capacity, like he has more that he can produce at a given time. So now, where he would maybe spend 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day, even in the field, picking these things, by hand or using some other machinery or whatever, a scythe, sickle, whatever, right? I'm not a farmer, in case you couldn't tell, right? He's using this previous machinery, and it would take him 12 hours to do this whole thing, right? Now he has a tractor, and it takes him half as much time, which means either he can do half as much work and get the same amount as he did before, Or what he can do is he can use the profits from that to expand his production. Maybe now he has a field twice the size. Now he can produce twice the amount for the exact same amount of labor as before. And let's say that now he's produced this twice amount. Instead, he opts, let me buy another tractor. So he buys another tractor. He pays another guy to use that tractor. Now both of them are doing it. Productive capacity has increased a lot. And now we have a situation where presumably all over the place this is happening, and we have a scenario where once there were farmers all over the place, most people were farmers and they didn't employ anyone, they were just working with their family or whatever. Now you have some guys who are really efficient at producing food, who can maybe outproduce because they have more land or whatever, or they just happen to get the machinery faster. What ends up happening is they employ those guys that failed out. Those guys stop being peasants. They start becoming laborers and proletariat and whatnot. And obviously, what happens is you have the productive forces behind the economy, the means of production, how technology has advanced this, right? Increase the productive forces. You now have a society which was once perhaps oriented around primarily artisan, kind of like small scale production. Now it's oriented around medium to large scale production. And because of this, certain people will lose out and they have to become laborers. And as a result, you've swapped from that kind of more semi feudal society to a capitalist one. So the productive forces effectively forced the mode of production into being something else. Does anybody have any questions about that? I guess. I'll hold for like 10-15 seconds if somebody's got a question, and I'll keep going. Also, by the way, Coco the goat for just yapping in here alone. There's 7 of you and nobody's saying anything. Shame on you. Shame on you. No questions? All right, I'll keep going. So, ownership, control, power. So, the rules that organize production. So, the relations of production set who owns and controls productive assets. They define who must work, they define who must work, who can hire, and on what terms. So, we just kind of talked about. Who benefits from social wealth, they shape how output is distributed as wages, profits, or rent. They help explain, bro, I cannot read today, my goodness. They help explain why different groups develop conflicting interests and the link to power and institutions. The control over production tends to translate into wider social influence, and economic structure anchors patterns of authority across society. Anybody have any questions on this? Any concerns? Yes, Coco wins Twitch today. Coco wins. No questions? All right. So, forces and relations. So, growth creates friction. New tools and techniques expand what society can produce. Older ownership and work arrangements can block that new capacity. So, for example, the older ownership kind of blocks this new capacity in the sense that they can create laws and you know uh, rules and whatnot that kind of force a society into not developing as quickly as possible. So, oh, was I covering Mr. Krabs? I'm sorry, Lumpy. I didn't know. I didn't know. I was covering Mr. Krabs. Why are you covering me, crabs? um, so, maybe for example, let's say that you have Luddites and other people that are kind of like destroying um what is it, like printing presses, you know what I mean? Or some country decides to make printing presses illegal, for example. This older ownership, uh these older classes, I suppose, can use their wealth and power to try to delay the new mode of production from arising out of the current one. Um, However, this is pretty difficult. And the reason why it's difficult is because these contradictions begin to keep building up, like we're seeing right here. Sorry, my thing's like inverted. It's mirrored. So the tensions grow between what is possible and what is permitted, and then these conflicts show up as the instability in everyday economic life. And pressure forces change, so eventually existing relations cannot contain developing productive forces, and that clash pushes society toward a new way of organizing production. So this is again just reinforcing the historical materialism of it all. This is the end of section 2. So does anybody have any questions about this so far? If not, I will keep going. I'll keep going. No questions, no questions. All right. So section 3 is understanding class in Marxism. Okay. So before we start, I'm going to just ask, like, for example, mm, let me think. Let me think. Let me concoct some question for you guys. What would you say is the most common misconception that you would have, that you think people in general have about class? What do most people think class is? And why are they wrong? Lumpy. The middle class exists. Yeah, that's an example of where they're wrong, where people talk about the middle class, where they talk about lower, upper middle and lower class. That's where we get into my op, my enemy for all time, Max Weber. Yeah, bro. But since everybody's shy today, I don't know. I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable. Everybody's shy. We'll just keep going. It's okay. So I'd say class is your position in production. It is your relationship to production. And I would say, so class is about production. Marx defines class by your role in producing society's wealth. Um, and it is the central divide, and the central divide is whether you own productive property or not. So there is ownership versus selling labor power. Owners gain income through control of work and its output, and workers survive by selling their labor power for wages. And then why income can mislead? It's because people with similar pay can still occupy different class positions. To identify class, ask who owns, who works, and who benefits. Don't ask how much money they have. We're not talking much money. So, one of these reasons why Weber is my aunt is because everyone and their goddamn grandma, everyone, I swear to God, everyone, yeah, am I too low? My goodness, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Decor. Yeah, I'm trying to get it to work, but it's not. It's like it's mad quiet. I agree. Let me see if I can fix it real quick. Let me see what I can do about it. Maybe I have a filter on that's got it being all goofy. All right. Yeah, let's work on it right now. We'll work on it right now. We're gonna be going into the swap, the break soon, anyways. Let me see. Maybe I'll just get rid of my noise suppression low key. Is it any better or is it still quiet? It should be a little better. At least it looks like it is on my end. I could be wrong. But I mean, in the meantime, Red Spectre said, I feel like people focus on like pay or wages rather than the relationship to the means of production. Then AKS said that class is related to money, but you can have a lot of money and not be a capitalist. It's absolutely true. It's a tiny bit better. Okay. Okay, if it's a little better, it is what it is. That being said, this is why Max Weber is my op, because Weber says inequality is due to economic position, your social status, and your power. And this helps explain prestige and lifestyle differences and uneven opportunities. And Marx's sharper focus is that Marx centers class on the ownership and control of the means of production, and the core divide is owning productive property versus selling labor power. So to sort of, I don't know. We're gonna zoom my face forward, I think, and then we'll do the comparison. So Weber's bitch ass, and then Marx. Okay. Oh, I almost fell. Sorry. So Weber is saying that your class, I'm going to try to move my mic here, that your class is your relationship to consumption. And Marx says it's your relationship to production. I know it says reduction, but that is what it is. I'm not going to rewrite it. So the difference here for Weber and Marx is that Weber is saying that your class is defined by your economic position. And economic position is going to sound very similar to relationship to production. But the situation here is that he will use, or many people will extrapolate from Weber, the upper, middle, and lower class system, which is obviously kind of completely centered around income levels. So do you make a lot of money, a decent amount of money, or not a lot at all? You know what I mean? Marx is obviously going by your relationship to production. So where Weber would see a low income person, right? Marx might see a proletarian. So you know, proletarian, I mean, I'll explain exactly why this is not, it's not good. It doesn't really make sense. I mean, it makes sense to a certain extent, but it's not good, um, as a analysis in totality. So a proletarian can make, for example, 100K a year. You know what I mean? They are selling their labor, uh, and the value of their labor is obviously more than 100K, but the value of their labor is high enough that they're making $100,000 a year, right? On the opposite end, a capitalist may only be making, after taxes and deductions and cost and everything, they might only be making 50K a year. Weber looks at this and says, you know, here's a proletarian who makes 100K, and here is, you know, a prole that makes 50K, right? Here's a capitalist who makes 100K. And Weber says proletarian and this capitalist are members of the same class. Then they say this proletarian and this capitalist are members of the same class. But there's a fundamental issue here, right? It's that these people sell their labor. A proletarian sells their labor, right? A capitalist buys slash exploits. They buy and exploit labor. So what the capitalist does is they find a proletarian. So for example, you might have this capitalist here that makes 100K. He's employing a proletarian who makes 50K or minimum wage or whatever, right? Fundamentally, even though this proletarian and this capitalist make the same amount of money, this proletarian is always going to be subservient to the other capitalist. It doesn't matter how much money they make. What matters is who works for who. The capitalist does not work for the proletariat. The proletariat necessarily must work for a capitalist. So the proletarian who makes 100K is working for a capitalist. And if their labor is being exploited by the capitalist, that capitalist necessarily is making above the they're making surplus labor. They're profiting off of they're profiting off of the labor of the proletarian that's making 100K, and you can't profit off of somebody if they're making more money than you. So they're, the proletarian is following that person, that capitalist orders. They're working for that capitalist. They're selling their labor to that capitalist. And the, again, relationship is that the proletariat do not own the means of production. They use the means of production. And a capitalist rarely uses the means of production, but they own the means of production. So when you sells their labor and works with the means of production to produce a product, means of production which they do not own, and the other effectively purchases somebody's labor, purchases their time and skills for a period of time to produce a product for the person that's buying it. So the issue with Weber here is that Weber's bitch ass, smack him. Sorry. So Weber is really, really talking about this from a very cringe, simplistic kind of lens. So he's saying, well, your means of consumption, how much money you make, influences how much stuff you can buy, right? And that makes sense, right? At face value, somebody who makes 100K, whether they work for somebody else or not, they still make 100K. They can buy the same stuff. They probably live a pretty similar lifestyle, right? But the thing is does one own the means of production or not? So within each, class, each, the proletariat at large, wage laborers, you could find that there is a upper, middle, and lower class amongst them, right? Because they're all members of the same class, and they may have different interests as subsections, as strata of each class of the proletariat. But the reality is that they still, as a class, are organized as a group of people. They are organized necessarily against the capitalist class, which exploits them. So this is where you might find like, oh, yeah, the proletariat, but they're really the labor aristocracy. You could argue labor aristocracy is maybe like the upper class of the proletariat, but ultimately they're still the proletariat. So that's the issue. Is they still work on somebody else's means of production. They don't own it. They're alienated from their labor. Next. So classes versus strata. Maybe I'll move my face out of the way. I don't know where I'm going to put it, but I'll put it down here for right now. So strata is your measure. It measures your living standards. This is where I feel that there is some value in Weber's work. This is me, right? I think there's some value in it, insofar as instead of perhaps using the term class as he's using it, we can redefine it um, as strata. So class would be your relationship to the means of production, and strata, as I see it, would be your relationship to the means of consumption within a particular class. So one proletarian may have more access to items than another, but that does not negate the fact that they have the same relationship to the means of production. They just have a different relationship to the means of consumption. And I would say that ultimately the way that you make your money is more important than the way that you spend your money. So I feel like that's where I would put class above strata and not the other way around. So strata groups people by income, lifestyle, and what they can buy. In other words, your means of consumption. And it describes consumption differences and not how wealth is produced. Class, on the other hand, measures production roles. Class depends on whether you own productive property or sell labor power, etc. It focuses on who controls work and who depends on wages. And same income, different class. Two people can earn, just like we talked about back here while I was yapping. Two people can earn similarly, so they can earn about the same amount of money, yet relate to production differently. And that difference shapes their long-term interests and conflicts at work. Do we have any questions or concerns? Anything anybody would like to say? Coco said, I still gotta unpack the Weber part, lol. I'm at the halfway part in that because it seems to meet people where they're at, but feels like an error in my thinking. Do you want to elaborate? Do you want to elaborate, and we can kind of work that through really quickly? We can talk about that. Skibbity, 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 skibbity. No, it's all right. It's all right. I mean, if I see it, I'll obviously I'll talk about it. There's a little bit of delay for me when I see when I see the comments. Coco said, "Yeah, I try to talk about rich people in the way it harms people, but it's very flat. It's harder through text, to be honest. That's okay. That's okay. I mean, I think that there is validity in saying the word rich people or elites or when people want to be like the Epstein class or whatever. You know what I mean? I think there's a rhetorical value to it, right? But like somebody in Hollywood, a actor who a Timothy Chalamet or whatever that makes millions and millions of dollars by acting. They're making millions and millions of dollars by producing labor, by creating a product. The product being they have a role in the production of a film. There are actors and actresses and directors and all these other people who participate in the process of producing a film, but Paramount owns the film, or Disney owns the film, or whoever. You know what I mean? The capitalist, the owner, is not the worker, the proletarian, the Timothy Chalamet of it all, right? The actor. They, while they make a shitload of money, they still are having their labor exploited. every member of that crew is having their labor exploited to some extent, because obviously the you'll see the income, or the weekend sales of the film is far far larger than the budget for the film. And the budget, as far as I'm aware, for the most part, includes wages and the cost of labor and everything involved in producing the film. So while when you say rich people, actors and very wealthy people who are still producing labor, who are still proletarian, right? um I will say I think it's not the worst, because whenever somebody's saying rich person, most of the time you're thinking of somebody who has a lot of money, a lot of money. And for the most part, most people don't make a lot of money without participating in the exploitation of another group of people or another person. So it's not the end of the world, but ultimately it is preferable to use class generally, at least as your basis. You should use this as your basis as a Marxist, right? Um, Using class as a relationship to the means of production, right? But I will say again, I understand what you're trying to say. I understand what you're trying to say. I don't think it's the worst. Um, but as long as you understand what you mean, it's a lot easier for you to explain that, to expand on what you mean when you say rich person to somebody else. You know what I mean? Um, but if you don't know what you mean when you say rich people, it makes it a lot more difficult for you to have a good argument for why the rich person is bad or whatever. You know what I mean? Or why the rich person exploits somebody. Because when you say rich, again, someone can be like, well, who does Timothy Chalamet exploit? I don't know. I just keep saying him because I want to watch Dune 3, by the way. But why does this actor how do they exploit anyone? And then you can be like, oh, well, they have an assistant. But now you're at the point where you're talking about something where you're kind of on the back foot, when you could be instead on the attack, on the assault, I suppose, on capitalism, by talking about capitalists specifically. It's a lot easier to say that capitalism is bad by bringing up Jeff Bezos than creating a condition for somebody to bring up, Timothy Chalamet. You know what I mean? It's hard. It's hard to be like, he's evil. You know what I mean? But I'll move on. I'll move on. So same income in different class. Same pay, different position. So two people can earn similar incomes and share a lifestyle, and their role in production can be still fundamentally different. So a small business owner who employs maybe one or two people might have effectively the same living conditions as their other two employees. And this is where you'll have situations where you're arguing with a conservative who has a small business, or a family member that has a small business, or a friend that has a small business, whatever, right? And they're talking about, well, who am I exploiting? I pay this one guy, he makes 50K a year. You know, I only make 55K a year and I do more work, because ostensibly they probably do, spend more of their time in many instances actually participating in the labor related to their workplace, right? So all three of those people, him and his workers, might have basically the same standard of living. You know what I mean? But the reality is that when the business fails, or if the business doesn't fail, or if the business fails, you know, um, as long as it's not, what is it? Limited liability. Yeah, an LLC, and limited liability corporation or company. Um, the proletariat doesn't have to concern themselves with the matters of owning the business, because they don't own the business, they don't own the means of production. And similarly, if that small business becomes really productive and really successful, that success funnels not into the proletariat of that business, it funnels into the business owner, because the business owner owns the business and the proletariat does not. The proletariat sells their labor. So they might have the same, standard of living, but they don't own the means of production in the same way, which means that they have different interests. A proletariat who makes the same amount of money as a capitalist, they still maybe have the same living standard, but different interests. The capitalist wants to pay the proletariat as little as they can and make as much money, as much profit, and they want to make the proletariat work as much as possible. But the proletariat wants to work as little as possible and make as much money as possible. And they don't concern themselves with the profit of the company because the profit of the company does not go back towards them unless they're making piecework, for example. But even then, if they're making piecework pay the profitability of the company, they only care about that insofar as they can make more money off of it. So, same living conditions, same standard of living, same means of consumption, different product, different relationship to production creates different interests in production and different class interests. And those class interests are fundamentally antagonistic to each other. But I'm gonna have to start moving it right along here before I go for too long. So, engineer, another example, sells labor power. The engineer survives by exchanging work time for wages. Their livelihood depends on being hired by an employer. A small owner owns productive property. The owner survives through ownership of productive assets. Income can come partly from employees' labor, but not theirs. So they may use some of their income is me coming from the labor of their employees. But the thing is that their labor is not being exploited because they cannot exploit, and by their labor, the business owner cannot exploit their own labor because they own the business in which the labor is being produced to develop. So they can't exploit their own labor in the same way that they exploit others' labor. That's just the case. Okay, so there's the break. We're not exactly, we're not, I'd say we're a little over halfway through, but that makes sense. We have about 45 minutes. Does anybody have any questions? Again, maybe you can, think about it like you're doing me a favor. Do you have any questions? Can make me so happy, so wonderful, so smiley in my soul. If you have questions, anything to talk about, anything for me to clarify, anything you're just curious about, you know what I mean? Any concerns, anything where you're like, I think maybe I have this wrong. Even if it's like, Discord or whatever, if you want to DM me or Lumpy or whoever to make it anonymous, so you don't get embarrassed or whatever. But in the meantime, I am gonna take a little sip of some water because I'm a little thirsty guy. Ay, ay, ay. All right, the camera's back. The camera's back. How does the landlord fit in? Can you elaborate? What do you mean by how does the landlord fit in? With the means of production? Let me go full face on then. We're still on the break, but might as well answer some questions here. So, the landlord does not necessarily own the means of production if we're talking about landlords who are I spelled break right this time. Yes, you did. The landlord does not necessarily own the means of production in a traditional sense when we're talking about landlords, as in like housing, like a landlord for housing. What they're gonna own is um, they just own the land.
So here you have like the landlord versus the the tenant.
And this is another reason why you wouldn't want to. I personally wouldn't. Um, I would say that the landlord would be a class on their own, but I would not call the tenant a class of their own. And I would say this because the landlord is producing profit off of the land um, by asking their tenant for rents. Most people know what a landlord is, so they don't need this, explained in excruciating detail, right? But the thing about the tenant is that most people think about landlords as just like, um, the person that owns the houses or the house that you're living in or whatever. But the reality is that there's many landlords who also own um, the buildings that many factories are built on. That many companies, in some instances, do not own the land that their business is built on or is in. They rent the building. So there can be a capitalist, for example, who extracts labor from their workers in production, extracts the surplus labor of their workers, makes a profit, but uses some of that profit, and now it's not profit, it's just cost of production, right? To pay for rent. So, ironically, the capitalist exploits, in some instance, some of the labor that is exploited from the worker for the purpose of the capitalist is then exploited from the capitalist by the landlord, because the landlord is not making money off of production. The landlord is making money off of the perceived speculative value of the land on which um, production occurs or subsistence occurs or habitation or whatever, right? So the landlord would be a class of its own. So I mean, if I'm going to talk about all the classes here, and after this, we'll probably say that the break is done.
We would have like the capitalist, landlord, proletariat, you have artisans, you have peasants slash farmers, right? Slash farmers. And then you have what is called lumpen.
Lumpen proletariat. So to quickly explain, a capitalist is somebody uh, who produces a commodity or service or whatever, and in order to produce it, they own the means of production in which that place is produced, or they own the means of production required to produce said product. They do it by asking a proletariat, by paying somebody for their labor in order to produce that product. A landlord really just is getting income from rent. They're just getting their income from the speculative, the perceived value of the property in which they are renting, right? Then you have artisans. Artisans own the means of production, but they do not employ anyone in that production. They do all the production themselves. They own the means of production, and they use the means of production to produce their own commodities and whatnot for the purpose of profit, for making money. So they don't employ anybody else. And peasants and farmers, um, most of the time they own the means of production, or they lease it, or they rent it, or whatever. But the thing is, the difference is that they own the product of their labor, and they sell the product of their labor for profit in the market or whatever, right? Lumpen proletariat is kind of a catch-all term for everybody that falls outside of this. Um, it's not my favorite. Personally, I like to kind of use lumpen for any one of these things. So, like, if you're the child of a capitalist, you're not a capitalist, but I would say you're like a lumpen capitalist. You know what I mean? You have a similar class position as your family because your family is that class position and whatnot, right? So you're kind of like a lumpen capitalist. But lumpen proletariat would be like somebody who's disconnected from production or production generally. Like maybe they do kind of like they do like a part-time job, but like they don't really live completely off of that. Um, it's possible that maybe they're a kid or whatever. Lumpen proletariat could be somebody who's completely unemployed. It could be somebody who's semi-employed. Um, it could be, in many instances, a lot of people, Marxists in general, like to, at least in recent times, refer to them as like people that were in prison or people engaging in criminal activities, etc., etc., etc. Right? But I would clarify that in this whole area, there is a little group of people, right? This group of people in this circle are proprietors. They own the means of production, they own property, and these two do not. They don't own property, they do not own the means of production. So you have a block of people who have the interest in maintaining private property ownership, and another group of people who are not. Because if you don't own private property, what is the point of maintaining private property? You know what I mean? That being said, it's not so simple that you are either one thing or the other. I know many Marxists, many communists, many people in general have the uh, kind of opinion that you must be one thing or the other, but the reality is that you don't have to. You know what I mean? That being said, I hope that sort of answered your question. Sorry. Yeah, do they just own a part of the means of production? So, yes. If it is something being used for the purpose of production, then they own the means of production. If it is being used for something else, then they own it. The main thing is that the landlords don't own property specifically. Like they're not defined. They do own property, duh, but they're not defined by owning the means of production. They're defined by owning land and seeking, uh, rent from people who want to use the land. So what they do is they extract wealth from land. They extract wealth from production or whatnot occurring on land. Moral of the story. So like a proletarian might go to work, make their money, come home, and then have to pay a percentage of their income to the landlord. So the landlord may be exploiting a capitalist and the production coming out of that, or they may be exploiting a proletarian or a farmer or whatever and taking a percentage of income. So landlords are defined by rent seeking and land ownership. So hopefully that clears everything up. I will conclude the break. Conclude the break by doing a small break and turning off my camera to take a little extra sip of water. Alrighty. Let's get through this. I do not believe that there is substantially more. Yeah, there's not a crazy amount more. We're a little over halfway, but I can kind of zoom us through here so we can all go to bed and whatnot. So ownership and production. I think we've kind of been explaining a lot of this. This is kind of the complication of historical materialism in class, and talking about Marxist economics and whatnot. Is that there is the tendency that we explain one thing. Well, you have to explain one thing to explain another thing. So I end up talking about all these things a little bit before we ever get there. So understanding class and Marxism, ownership in production, uh, what counts as the means of production. So they are the key assets used to produce goods and create wealth. So that is, common examples would be the land and natural resources that supply inputs for production, um, workplaces and infrastructure like factories, farms, warehouses, and offices, tools, machinery, computers, and technology that raise productivity. And why ownership matters for class is that the control of these assets shapes who directs work and who benefits. And class divisions form around owning productive property versus not owning. So proprietorship versus non-proprietorship, um, the sale of your labor versus the purchasing of another's labor. So capitalist class. So the capitalists are owners of productive property. Hopefully my face is not totally in the way. I'm gonna move my big ass head all the way down here in the middle. So they are owners of productive property. They control key means of production like workplaces, equipment, and capital. They profit through wage labor, profit through the exploitation of wage labor. They hire workers and earn profit from the gap between output value and wages. So the value of the commodity in which they're selling, the value of the commodity they're selling, let's say they pay a worker, $20 an hour, but every hour they produce $100 worth of commodities. When the capitalist sells the commodity for $100, they pay the worker $20 and they pocket the rest to cover cost of production and whatnot, and then they keep whatever is that they're left with. Um, so they hire workers and earn profit from the gap between output value and wages. And core material interest is they pursue accumulation by cutting costs, boosting productivity, and expanding markets. So the proletariat, keep keeping in mind with our SpongeBob references, um, the position in their position in capitalism is that the proletariat own little to no productive property or capital assets. When traditionally you would say they own none, but the reality is that in our modern society there is a certain mixture of classes where some people, technically speaking, they own a little bit of productive property because they own stocks or whatever. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean that they are a capitalist or a shareholder specifically. My personal way of looking at it is that whatever um, relationship to production you have that is the um, majority of your income. So this is where I bring in kind of income a little bit, is that sure, there might be a proletariat who owns, Bitcoin or stocks or whatever, right? If they own a bunch of stocks, if most of their income is from being a proletariat, they are a proletariat. They now, because they own shares, or now they because they are participating in, the ownership of capital, like owning shares, for example, they now have a smaller interest. They also carry the interest of bourgeois, of capitalist interests. So as a worker, when they show up to work, they have the interest of having lower wages and sorry, not lower wages, higher wages and lower work hours. But when it comes to when they want to increase the amount of money that they're making from dividends from owning shares, then they say to themselves, maybe they'll look at an article and they'll go, "Oh yes, it's good that this company that I own shares in is lowering wages and increasing productivity." So this is where you get perhaps issues of people where they're, you know, again, your labor aristocracy, where they still are proletariat because the majority of their income comes from being a proletarian, but some of their income is supplemented. Sorry, my mask is getting all up in my face here, but some of their income is supplemented by the fact that they own other forms of capital. So again, another thing, they enter production mainly as employees and not as owners. Um, that being said, the reason why it says mainly as employees is because early on, you could have a person who enters production as a co-owner or as a working in a collective or whatever, or any number of things. They begin production as a member of the workplace, but not necessarily as a wage laborer. They're maybe getting paid, contractually, like they're a contractor or whatever, where they don't actually work for the capitalist. They just, you know, help the capitalist every now and again or whatever. But eventually, maybe they, end up just working for them effectively as a proletariat. So how they survive is they must sell their labor power to employers for wages, employers as in capitalists. Their livelihood depends on getting and keeping paid work, and their core material interest is higher pay and reliable hours to maintain living standards, or in fact increase living standards, um, and safer workplaces, shorter time demands, so shorter work hours, and more job security. So here we go, mixed class position. So a mixed class, or a class with mixed roles, is they own some productive property, but often work themselves daily. Their income can combine personal labor with small scale ownership. Common examples would be self employed tradespeople, family shops, and independent restaurant owners. Small business operators who employ few or no workers. So that would be like an artisan, for example. Why it matters for class analysis is they share interests with workers in working conditions and security. They also share interests with owners in protecting property and revenue. Do we have any questions, anything, any concerns, or anything like that about the topic thus far? Any areas of clarification? Now I'll give it a couple of seconds and then I'll keep going. No? All right. So section 5, class conflict and capitalism. Roots of capitalist, or roots of class struggle, is, oppose interests at work. Because people occupy different roles in production, they need different things. Those needs collide over how work is organized and rewarded. What employers push for is profits depend on keeping costs down and output moving up, which means they want to increase productivity and lower their costs. Competition pressures firms to cut labor costs, and raise productivity. So the competition between firms may result in them, not selling enough products or commodities as they normally were, so they have to lower the price of those commodities. And as a result of doing that, they either, A, B, or C. A, they lower the cost of labor and also the cost of the product. B, they lower the cost of the product itself and keep the labor cost the same. And C, they do both. They lower labor costs and they also lower they make a worse product, but they make a worse product that sells for a little bit less, and they're able to produce profit, because ultimately, who cares if they make a good profit or a good product? What they're interested in is making money. On the other hand, what workers push for is higher pay, safer jobs, and more predictable security. And they also fight for shorter hours and better living standards. So, dependence and conflicts. Let me check things if anybody has said anything thus far. I don't believe so. Everybody is chilling. Everybody is quiet today. So there is mutual dependence. Capital needs workers' labor to create value and profit, and workers need wages from employers to meet daily needs. The built-in conflict is that profit pressures firms to cut costs and intensify work, and workers push back to defend living standards and conditions. And the engine of change here, historical materialism, is that these clashes make a class struggle a recurring force in history. And the mutual dependence here is not that they need each other. It's not that the proletariat needs the capitalist in a literal sense, in an individual sense. It's that the capitalist creates the proletariat, and the proletariat is defined by the relationship to the capitalist. The capitalist is defined by the relationship to the proletariat. So they're dependent on one another to continue existing as the classes that they do. So the result often is that obviously, there is revolution and there is the working classes demanding control of their workplaces, seizing control of their workplaces, and managing their workplaces. And from that, they become the ones who own the means of production and distribute the profits from the labor that they produce. Did I get it? Yep. Okay, got it all. So wages versus profit pressure. Wages and demand. Workers must earn enough wages to buy the produced goods. If wages lag, demand weakens, and unsold output builds up. Competitive pressure is that firms compete by cutting labor costs to protect profits, but lower wages can shrink the market firms rely on. And the instability as a normal outcome is that this tension helps produce recurring crises such as layoffs, recessions, and insecurity. So, what this means is it's just very simple economics insofar as if the proletariat, if the average worker does not make enough money to buy the average product, then the average product must be sold at a lower price. And for example, if they were already selling that product at a lower price, and they have to, lower wages in order to do that, the average worker's wages continue to depreciate, to get worse, to get lower, and the capitalist continues to make less and less money. And that is a scenario in which, there's going to be layoffs, recessions, and whatnot. It's also a scenario where, you'll have, the people talk about capitalists kind of having to figure it out. You know what I mean? They got to figure it out. But the reality is that even if they do figure it out, and they have in the past, obviously, this results in a scenario where there's constant ups and downs, booms and busts, and this conflict is going to continue to happen. This economic structure is going to continue to be unstable because there is a contradiction between what one group of people wants and what the other group of people want. That being said, crisis from competition, technology and competition. Rival firms adopt new tools to raise productivity and cut costs, and this often reduces the amount of labor needed and creates layoffs and or weakening labor or weakening bargaining power for workers. Meaning that if there's a lot of people that need a job, then obviously your ability to ask for a higher wage is much lower and your bargaining power is much lower because a capitalist knows that they can pay somebody much, much less than you. So you have to also compete with other workers, and this results in a kind of race to the bottom overall. Another issue is overproduction crisis. If wages are squeezed, people cannot buy everything produced. The result can be overproduction, unemployment, falling profits, and recession. And I would clarify that this isn't an accident. Crises follow from capitalism's normal drive for profit under competition. This is a natural occurrence at all points. And yes, Lumpy, yes, Lumpy. The capitalists create their own grave diggers. That's one of the questions on the quiz that people got a little confused with, but it's okay. We fixed it. And now on the topic of the quiz, good job everybody. By the way, for the most part, everybody did pretty good. So, anybody have any questions? Any questions on anything so far? I'll wait for a minute or so. No questions. All right. We're in a quiet day today. Quiet day today, guys. All right. So imperialism. So section 6 is global expansion and historical materialism. So imperialism, we're going to talk a lot more about this later on, but this is kind of a little small introduction for the Imperialism Week in a couple weeks from now. We're going to be talking about this more in detail. But when we're talking about these crises where there's overproduction, where the workers need more money, where it seems kind of intuitive that a worker cannot both make more money and a capitalist make more money, right? If the capitalist gives the worker more money, that means the capitalist makes lower profits, right? This is not necessarily true, that this is an impossible situation. Imperialism is when capital moves outwards. So why capital moves outwards? When profits tighten at home, firms look abroad to invest. They pursue cheaper labor, raw materials, and expanding markets. So capitalism beyond its borders. Capital exports links capital export links. Oh my goodness. Capital export links distant regions into one production system. Foreign economies are reorganized to serve accumulation and trade. And by reorganized, that is a very nice way of saying invasion, war, coups, etc. The general assault on indigenous native peoples and their land, and the general theft of their resources. So it results, capital must protect itself, and to protect itself, it does imperialism. Imperialism is when capital has, developed and accumulated itself about as much as it can at the, present moment in its current market. So it expands and exports itself to other markets. So if it can produce a product for cheap in, another country, they will do that. They'll produce the product for cheap in another country, and they'll sell it for the same price that they would have sold it anyways, or maybe even for slightly less than they would have anyways, or normally, in their home market. And as a result, it ends up creating a situation where the standard of living increases, the the capacity to consume is much higher, so workers make more money, and so do capitalists. And this creates a scenario where you have, again, the labor aristocracy, quote unquote, where the proletariat of one nation kind of, sort of, a little bit has a continuing interest in the imperialism of another country. So you have scenarios where you get a kind of proletarian chauvinism, a a separation of the proletariat because of the strata, the income differences, the um, interests that coincide with their differing income amounts and the standard of living that they want to have. So the contradictions go global, and imperialism shifts pressures outward but does not resolve them. Exploitation, dependency, and international conflict intensify worldwide. Let me move my face out of the way, kind of. About as much out of the way as it can possibly get. um, J. Leet Sauce. True capitalism has never been tried. Yeah, sure. True capitalism has never been tried. It's definitely been tried. It's definitely been tried. Um, true capitalism, true anything is kind of fake. Um, but history through production. Um, so it starts from material life. This is kind of, I guess, recap a little bit. Begins with how people produce necessities, not with beliefs. Treats work and production as the base for, as the base of social organization. So you ask structural questions. You focus on who produces, who owns productive assets, and who gains. My face is all itchy today. And then you link power and institutions to positions within production. And you explain change over time. It explains change over time uh, through content continuity. Oh my goodness, continuity persists when production relations fit productive development. This slide is really killing me right now. And conflict grows when material interests clash inside the system. So materialism, class, and struggle. I'm gonna argue with this person in a minute. Um, you start with material life, then define class by production, and you center contradictions and struggle. So you have, yep. This is so tiny. I don't even want to read it, but I'll read it. Explain society from how people produce essentials, not ideas first. You track change when productive forces strain existing social arrangements. You define class by production. So class is your relationship to the means of production. This is all review, for the class. We're about at the end here. So it is your means of production, not your income. Ownership versus selling labor power shapes interests and power. And the center contradictions and struggle is profit pressures, wage cutting, and productivity. Uh, yeah, profit pressures, wage cutting, and productivity, yet workers must buy goods. These contradictions make class struggle a central driver for change. All right. So here's our QR code. Yeah, so it's okay. It's okay, Lumpy. I for whatever reason I didn't notice it when I did my quick little review of it before. So this is the QR code. Just scan it. Just scan it. You'll be able to see um, our link tree. You'll be able to look at the class. If you want to get access to the class, if you don't already, if you want access to it, it will be $10 for the super version, $6 for the mid version, and it's free obviously to view this just as is. But the $6 and $10 version, you get assignments and grades. So you get quizzes and discussion questions and a midterm assigned to you and a final and whatnot, like a traditional college course, right? And the $10 version, you get everything obviously that we just said, except you are able to get personal discussion with me and assistance with me for about three-ish hours. I'd say somewhere between 3 and 6 hours. I'll be available to help you with these things. Kuka said, "What if we join the paid version later in the course? Could we retrospectively go back to do what we missed?" Yes, you can. I would clarify that if you are joining like way after, um, I would just make sure that you know that you just wouldn't have um, like that extra help for like the midterm if we've already done the midterm, or for the final if we already did it. Um, but you know, if you join the course before it's completed, if you join the course probably maybe by like week 5, then you're totally fine. If you join the course even at like week 6, basically, you're again totally fine to do all of the quizzes and discussion and everything. The only thing is that obviously, if it is super far ahead or super far back, um, you'll just have to wait for me to get around to you and getting everything, graded for you. That's all. So it just may be a little bit more jank experience wise. What are the prerequisites? Knowing how to read, but even then, we'll still help you with that. Yeah, I mean, for the most part, no prerequisites. J Leet sauce. I mean, are you actually interested in understanding Marxism, Mr. Sauce, or Madam Sauce, or they them sauce? Kind of. I can't be a communist though. Why not? Communism is based. It's goaded though. It's a baller. You're Catholic? Come on, what are you talking about? You can be a communist. You can be a communist and a Catholic. It's not completely, you know, disconnected. You can be both. I was a Catholic for a little bit. I'm not anymore, but the thing is I feel like Jesus talks about, like what's the first time he ever gets pissed off? What's the first time he gets pissed off, Sauce? He gets mad and he starts whipping money changers. He starts whipping rich people in, the house of God and whatnot. So what's the root of all evil? Greed. What system, you know, centers itself completely around greed? The accumulation of profit? Capitalism. What system opposes that arrangement, that mode of production? Communism. Um, Obviously, some communists are atheists or have an issue with religion, but in my opinion, I don't think that means you can't be a communist and also religious. I think you can be both. So I think you're good, buddy. I think you're all right. All right. So if everybody's had a chance to scan the QR code, again, we are on Google Classroom. Again, contact Lumpy if you'd like to get access to our Google Classroom, get access to the assignments and the quizzes and everything and the midterms. They'll walk through with you. They'll help you with getting access to it. So all the quizzes are going to be on Tuesdays at midnight. So they're all due Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. EST, so Eastern Standard, and all the discussions are due an hour before Wednesday's class. But you can, obviously submit it all the way up until 7 p.m. And the midterm is going to be about 500 to 1,000 words. The final, I'm still kind of working through on what I want the final word count to be. I'd say probably around 2,000 words. So I would highly suggest that your midterm is centered around what you'd like to talk about for the final. But that being said, the prompts for this midterm I will have up very soon. And you will be able to turn in your midterm basically all the way up until your final is due. So if you want to do both at kind of the same time, that's fine. Um, but if you want your midterm to help you in creating your final, writing your final, then you should probably use your midterm as a kind of first draft. So here are the sources for today that I used. Here's the main basis. So if Max Weber, he's not a communist, but this is where obviously I'm pulling my criticism of Max Weber from. It's always best that you read from the person you're arguing against or, criticizing. So the sources are Max Weber, Class, Status, and Party. Bukharin, Historical Materialism, a System of Sociology. Particularly, I was looking at the section on class. Then there is chapter 52, titled Classes in Capital, volume 3. It's in part whatever the fuck B11 is. I don't know. I can't remember. I don't know the Roman numerals that good anymore. And then the last one is Engels, and it's part 3, Historical Materialism of Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific. For next week, the big thing that you guys are going to have to read, because we're going to be talking about capitalist and Marxist economics, would be Value, Price, and Profit. And we will cover this on Tuesday, July 21st, in our Kollectiv book club. So if you join our Discord server, which again, go to our QR code, and you can join the Discord server. You just have to do obviously like a little entry survey so we know that you're not a goober. And once you get your roles, once you do everything, and you get into the server, then you can join in the book club and read along with us. Okay. Seems like I ended kind of just perfectly on time, I guess. I'm happy to sit here and talk to you guys for a minute. So I'll hang out here until maybe 9:05. It'll be kind of like a little break. Till about 9:05, and then I'll go. All right. So I'm happy to sit here for a few minutes and answer any questions anybody has. Okay. But obviously, that being said, if people just drop out and peter out, that's fine. But I'll go through some of the slides that are relevant if the question that you guys have is relevant to the slides. If they didn't read wage, labor, and profit, they can go through that too. Yep. Yeah, no problem, Coco. No problem. I mean, I'm happy to be here. Happy to be here. Thank you for yapping with me. You know what I mean? Thank you for being, you and Lumpy kind of go to even even sauce, even sauce. It's good. It's good that you guys were here. You know what I mean? It's nice to have questions to work off of. That being said, Lumpy, if you want, would you like to raid one of our what is it? Oh my goodness. Raid one of our fellow Tank Tube members, maybe one that has like lower viewers right now. We can send all of you goobers over to them. Oh, punched my mic, my bad. Maybe mycelium, I think. Oh, we raid when I end? Okay. Then end me. Get rid of me. I surrender, Lumpy. Send me away. I'm waiting, Lumpy. Get rid of me. I have to end it? Okay, well, you did it last time. Whatever.